All right. Think everybody stand up if you're not here. Just while I'm telling the odd joke, it's a trait that a lot of men use. That guy who's telling jokes and being a smart aleck and the life of the party guy and everything like that. The one who's always smiling and doing like that. There's a lot of the times the guy that's hiding a whole lot of stuff behind that front. Okay, so I'm 45 years old. I've been the king of the castle for a long time at that stage of my life. I've had full control of my relationships as long as they lasted. And I'm okay. I'm normal. I'm like a whole lot of other fellas that I know. And the thing about this world is when you're carrying a whole lot of stuff, a man like me, or like I used to be, doesn't hang out with the choir boys. I hang out with fellas that I feel I fit in with, or fellas that accept me for the way that I am. So when I was in Whanganui, gangs was not something that I ever thought I would get into because of boarding school. But I associated with the Black Power in Whanganui, partly to help me with my job, to do the repos for group rentals when I was the manager of group rentals. But also, these guys respected me for the way that I used to play sport, which was full of aggression, as I said earlier. And I never felt judged by them. And that's one of the biggest things that a perpetrator, regardless of what I'm doing in my own home. And the thing is, we never inwardly look at our own behaviour. So I'm that dad who was down the school quite a few times telling teachers to watch their language around my kids. All that sort of stuff going on. How many parents in the room? All right, I know from your chosen careers, some of you can't answer this. But what would you do if someone hurt your kids? Or what would you want to do to them? I can answer it. You'd want to kill them, hurt them. I had to come to a realisation in my life, and this is something that a lot of men have to do, is that I should have stabbed myself up. Because I'm the only person that I know that ever hurt my kids and my partners over the years. And the thing is, all my partners were someone else's child. So what we know about change, for someone to make change in their life, change in their job, change in where they live, change in what they do with their life, it's all about timing, as I said earlier, and it's about their timing. You can be part of a cog that starts that journey. You're not necessarily going to be the whole journey for them. You may just be the air at the beginning. You may be the agency that they're handed on to help them on the journey once they've started. And you may be part of the agency that brings them out at the other end and helps them to sustain the change. Because that's the biggest thing. A lot of people make change, or they start to make change and stuff like that, and they drop back. Relapse, whatever you want to call it. That's one of the hardest things that I find when I'm talking to perpetrators, is in convincing them that you're going to make a few mistakes. This isn't just going to stop like that. There's going to be some backward steps along this journey out. But they need to become less and less. And the more tools you can get and the more skills that you can get to start using instead of the old ones that you always fall back to, because that's the reality of it. things can go pretty good in the house for 5-6 months. But when the shit hits the fan, you go back to what you know works. And you go back to those old tools. So now I just want to finish off by telling you how change came about for me. So I'm 45 years old. I've been hanging out with a guy, and this is another part of this minimisation world that us perpetrators live in. You've all got that one mate, or you've all got that people that you know, and you think to yourself, I'm not as bad as him. And I used to hang out with a mate when I was in Foxton who I considered violent. He was violent to everybody, the public, his family, the police. They never sent squad cars. When his name was involved, they sent armed defenders. He was having running battles with the nomads by himself. Tried to kill the Mossy Hinds at the Mardi Gras one year with a samurai sword. He was a 7th Dan black belt in ninjutsu. Had a huge rage. He was a really dangerous guy. Even when we were drinking sometimes, he'd, and I have to say, and I don't leave this out intentionally, but I guess you've all guessed, from the age of 19 onwards, you've got to add alcohol and drugs into my life. And particularly when I was drunk on Karuba, that certainly intensified what used to happen in my household, but it wasn't the catalyst. For some guys, the catalyst of their behaviour is too much drink. But certainly as an additive to whatever I already was carrying, it used to intensify what happened in my home. But I'd be sitting there with my mate and he'd come up and he'd poke you, like in a particular place, and you'd be stuck for about 30 seconds. Just nerve shocks and stuff like this. This guy was really dangerous. We'd drive around Foxton, firearms under the seats. Even a carload of them wouldn't come anywhere near this guy. If we were in the hotel, they wouldn't come in. If we walked in, they'd walk out. And it was more him, but if there was 2 of us together, then it was worse for them. And we became thorns in the side of them for a little while. We helped families that they stood over. I used to think it was my right. The conflict in my life was what I thrived on. So I'd been hanging out with this guy for about 2 or 3 years and he started to go soft on me. And that's my interpretation of it to start off with. He's going soft on me. What's the matter with you, man? They've just stood over such and such. Let's go around there. Nah, bro. It's not really out. Just leave it for the police and that. What's the matter with you? Gee. Come on, man. What's up with you? It took him ages to tell me. And because he was ashamed. But finally he goes to me one day, well, actually, bro, I've been doing the anger management course in Levin. Now, don't forget where I am in my world yet. My next statement to him was, well, good on you, bro, because you need it. His next sentence was, why don't you come, bro? And I gave him his pedigree. I'm nothing like you, man. Don't you ever put me in the same category as you. I'm nothing like you, man. I don't need that crap. At the time, I was in between relationships, so I'm hurting no one. I'm drinking heavily between relationships, but I'm still maintaining my job and everything, which again, to me, reinforced the choices that I made in this area around domestic violence. As the manager of Mitre 10 and stuff like that over the years, I've had to deal with some irate customers over bits and pieces. I've had to deal with staff issues. And as much as I wanted to take them around the side of the building and punch them in the head, I dealt with them professionally. So again, reinforced the choice that I made once I shut my doors. I offended my mate that night. He said, all right, man. And I just went, I'm nothing like you, bro. I don't need it. You do. The change comes, it's about timing, definitely. But if you're that person that wants to help change Each time you say something or each time you do something with the right AA, and I'm not talking about alcohol anonymous here, I'm talking about approach and attitude. So if you can remember that acronym, AA, if you continue to have the same approach and attitude with that guy or with that person each time you speak to them, don't put on your judgy pants one day, or I'm sick of this prick. I've already had 30 times talking to him. Could be the 31st time that you talk to me that I'm ready to hear you. You know? So what you need is perseverance also. Now, luckily for me, this mate of mine had a little bit for me. Now, I live on the main highway right between Levin and Foxton. He used to have to travel to Levin every Wednesday night to go to course. So about 6:30 there'd be a baby. Oh, yep, the bro's off to course. And he used to call back in on his way home. And granted, at the time, it was to sit down and have a joint with me. But he started to talk to me about what he was learning. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, bro. They're trying to fucking brainwash you. That is not the real world. There is no families out there like the Waltons and the Brady Bunch, where we all say goodnight to each other, John boy, and there's no conflict in the household. And that, sadly enough, or truly enough, was exactly what I believed then. Like I said earlier, I believed that shit went on in just about every house. And the ones that it didn't were strange. So after a few weeks of him calling in and talking to me about that stuff, I said, listen, man, I don't want to hear that shit anymore. If you want to call in, just call in and we'll talk about normal stuff. So he kept calling in and we'd talk about normal stuff. But after he left, what I'd find is strategically placed papers in the porch, in the kitchen, and left in the bathroom somewhere. And they'd get a bit of a read on the way to the fireplace, but it'd just be like, oh, what a load of shit, that won't work, you know. What a load of shit, man. Throw it in the fireplace. Some of them were quotes and sayings, and it's like, oh, yeah. But the actual tools and skills stuff, what a load of crap, you know. So I was the manager of Mitre 10 Levin by then, and operating every day at work, but as soon as I got home after 5 o'clock, crack open a bottle and drink and smoke myself to sleep. And I don't know what possessed him one night, but on the way to course, instead of on the way home, he called in. And he goes, what are you up to, bro? And I just said, just cracked my first bottle, bro. And he goes, man, you're just going to sit here and get pissed like you do every other night. Why don't you just come for a ride, man? Just do something different. They got coffee and biscuits. Okay, man, hurry up. I'll come and support you. That was my intention. So I jumped in the car with him and we went over to Levin to a place called Jack Allen House. Walked into this room and there's about 18 guys sitting in a circle. Blue shirts, red shirts, some skinheads, some normal looking guys like myself that don't look like they are violent. And I met a woman, Nairi Thomas is her name, and her husband Bob, who facilitated the course. Nairi is a woman who's been working in this area for about 30 odd years. And they sat in a circle in the room. So I sat down just out of the circle because I'm only here to support my mate. And I let them start doing what they were doing. And they went around the room. And the course ran from 20 weeks. So some of these guys were at week 1 and 2. It was rolling over all the time. Some of these guys were at week 19, 20. So some of these guys at week 1 and 2 were making some mistakes still. Oh, I smacked my missus' head into the cupboard last night and everything, and I'm sitting there like... And it's hard to explain because, like I said, you don't inwardly look, but I'd sit up and I'd go, wanker. You know? By the end of the night, I'm going, bro, when we got back in his car, some of them need a punch in the head. And he's like, oh, bro, but they're trying. I said, look, man, that was depressing. Just take me home. So I got home. Next Wednesday, he called in. Come on. Yeah, okay. And so I started to go. And I started to engage. And when I say engage, trying to pick everything to bits. Trying to question Nairi all the time. How's that? That won't work. That won't work. That's bullshit. That's not even a real scenario. You know? And I talked about some bad things at the college, but I did get a good education and everything like that. Got the gift of the gab because I've been a salesman all my life. So I'd be questioning everything. And the one thing about this woman was I could never fluster her. She never said, shut up, Jeremy, let me finish, or anything like that. She'd just go, if you're interested in finding out about that, we can have a talk at coffee time. And I go, I don't want to waste my coffee time talking. You know? But these guys, when I first started sitting down in the circle, the first few weeks I'm sitting there and I was listening to men talk about stuff that I'd never heard men talk about. And the first couple of weeks I'm sitting there like, you better shut your mouth, man. You're incriminating yourself. You know, thinking to myself, wow, these fellas are talking about stuff that's secret shit. You know? And they were openly talking about it. And I could see that they were trusting this woman with that information. Now, I'd long not trusted anybody. So I'm 45 now, I've gone through nearly my whole adult life not trusting anybody. The families of my partners knew a bit about what I had got up to, and maybe one close friend. But to everybody else, I was that different guy. And so I listened to these guys and I watched them, and what it was these guys at week 1 and 2 that were still making mistakes, they'd start saying how they did something. And then the guy that week 19, 20 would go, oh, bro, I was doing that when I first started too, but this is what I do now. Well, you know, this is the tool that I've been given to use and stuff. And so these guys started bouncing off each other. And the facilitators are sitting there in the room, but the conversation and a lot of the understanding that came for the men came from each other. You know? And so they used to role play. Yeah? And one night Nairi said to me after I'd been 5 or 6 weeks in, I'd started to admit to some of my adult behaviour. So yep, I've whacked my kids, whacked my partners, done all that stuff. Yep. She said to me, and the thing about, you know, like I said, I condense stuff. She said, I just want you to be you when you get home from work. I want you to be my partner. And my family, you know, particularly in Wanganui, had worked me out. And I never understood that. But I'd get home from work sometimes and my kids would already be in their room. There'd be panic stations about 5 to 5 to make sure the house was tidy and everything like that before I got there. Just in case Dad's angry about something, my partner would be doing something around the house to try and avoid me. And I'd walk in sometimes and I'm in good as gold mood. And I'd get pissed off because they're treating me like a wanker. So I'd make my kids come out of their bedroom and give me a hug. Get the cold fish ones. But But she said, I want you to play you. And to me, I was play acting. She asked me to play a role, but I dropped into that role so easily because that's the man I'd been all the time. She gave me a scenario that I've just walked in the door. She's sitting on a seat crying by the table. There's still a big pile of washing. There's no tea cooking. This is the scenario she gave me, and I went, oh yeah, well, I can do that. So I'm play acting in my mind. But before, without even realising, you know, I'm like, fuck, you know, I walked in the door, and there's a door beside me when I think so. I slammed it shut. Half the boys shit themselves when I slammed the door. And I just dropped into this role, and I walked over. I hadn't realised, you know, this woman is a 60-year-old Pākehā woman. And I'm over the top of her yelling and screaming like, what the fuck is the matter with you? What are you crying for? Are the kids okay? You know what? Have you been sitting there crying all day? Haven't even done the fucking washing. You know? No fucking tea cooking. Have the kids been fed? What are you doing? And she's like, you know, pretending to cry. I can't tell you. And the scenario was that we just got a huge car bill. And she knew we couldn't afford it. And I'm like, well, what are you crying for? And she said, I can't tell you. And again, without realising, because she had her head down, I've picked her up by the chin and made her make eye contact with me. What are you crying for? And she said, I can't tell you. And pulled her head away and I just went, ah. And again, reaction, whatever you want to call it, bang on the back of the seat. Well, get the fuck out of my face then, because I don't want to walk in here and see that shit. And she, when I whacked the seat, she nearly toppled a little bit. And she went, stop, you're scaring me. Now, I thought we were still role-playing. So I'm, oh, fucking scared, right, get out of my sight. And this time I grabbed the seat and I was shaking it, like, and she nearly slipped off. And she dropped on the ground and she went, stop, Jeremy. And I could see almost tears in her eyes. Ninja grabbed me. What are you doing, bro? And I went, oh. You know, and I lost the plot at this woman. So what the fuck are you doing? You're an egg. You asked me to play act and I'm play acting, now you pretend you're scared for your stupid bloody course. You can stick it up your ass. I'm out of here. And I bolted outside. And I'm doing laps outside. Steaming. Bloody bitch set me up. Fucking make me look like a dick in front of all the boys. Fucking egg's supposed to be helping me. What'd you do that for? About 20 minutes later, I'm still going. My mate Rex pokes his head out the door. I said, is that us, bro? And he goes, no, it's coffee break. Oh, no. You know? And then Nairi poked her head out the door. And I said, don't you fucking come out here, laddie. You're an egg. You're supposed to be helping us and you do shit like that. What'd you do that to me for? And like I told you, I could never fluster this woman. She goes, would you like a coffee, Jeremy? I'm like, yeah, get me a fucking coffee. And then you come out here and tell me why you set me up like that. So she went and got a coffee and she came and sat outside. Ninja sat with her. Just to make sure. But I said, what are you doing? You know, what'd you do that for? You set me up. You asked me to play act, and I was play acting, and then you pretend you're scared. And she said something to me that, you know, over the years I'd had multiple visits from police. There was a particular mate of mine who had to come and pick me up a lot of the times, early hours in the morning and stuff like that, but no one had ever had a conversation with me. And she said to me, if that was you play acting, Jeremy, then I would hate to see you in full flight. And you were scaring me. And something clicked in my head. And as much as I say I hadn't been engaging those weeks, I'd been sitting and listening, taking in some stuff, and this stuff started to flood into my head. And it was particularly around when I used to yell and scream and I'd get right up in the face of my kids. My kids would go, stop, Dad, you're scaring me. And I'd go, don't be so fucking stupid. I love you. You know? I always poo-hooed it. I'm not going to hurt you. And I looked at this woman and I'd already started to trust her. I'd started to give her some trust over those weeks. And I thought to myself, she doesn't got no reason to lie to me. Am I scary, Nairi? And she goes, Jeremy, when you get like that, you are bloody scary, all right? And something happened to me that I hadn't done for years. And I just burst into tears. And when you've been an angry fellow all your life, that's pretty scary. What's the matter with me? I'm sorry, Nairi. I'm sorry. That's all I could say. I'm sorry, Nairi. I'm so sorry, Nairi. And then she made it worse because she came and put her arm around me. And she just sat down beside me. And she asked me a question that no one had ever asked me in my life before. No one. She goes, what makes you tick, Jeremy? Tell me your story. Why are you so angry all the time? And so I blurted out to her. She sat with me. Her husband carried on with the rest of the boys. For the evening, she sat outside with me on the step. And I told her about my childhood, about my journey. And she never sat there going, oh, but, and interrupting me or anything like that. She just sat and listened to me. And at the end of it, she goes, oh, well, now we've got something to work with, eh? And I went, I suppose. And from that night on, I started to become a sponge. And I did the 20-week course. And then I did another 20 weeks because I was still picking stuff up, and it was particularly around the psychological abuse. The physical stuff, you can check yourself pretty quickly on that. But there was stuff in that psychological and the male privilege stuff and all that, that's not even abuse, is it? That's not, like... Even, and you've got to put this into context, but right down to who controls the remote in your home. When your kids are watching TV or something and you walk in the door and it goes straight onto the news channel or whatever, and if they want to watch Shortland Street, they piss off to the bedroom. Just simple little things like that. This whole thing, this whole world started to open up to me about what an arsehole I'd been. And that there was other ways to do things. Now this woman had the knack of being able to, if she explained something and 5 of us in the room didn't get it, then she could explain it in 5 other different ways so we all got it individually. And she would take that time. So sometimes I would sit with her, the course went from 7 till 9, sometimes we would sit from 9 till 11. And she'd just talk with me about stuff and, do you get it now? Yeah. Or if I had questions or stuff like that, she would take the time and do it. And she'd never, ever judge me. She'd hold me accountable for some of the decisions or the choices that I made, and she would always use that word. And at the beginning, I didn't get it. But she'd go, why did you do that, Jeremy? And I'd go, and I'd have an excuse. And she'd go, no, you chose. And the reality was, it was choices that I was making. So I finished the 2 lots of courses, and then I hung around, and she asked me to start co-facilitating with her, to do some training around being a facilitator. So I started to do that, and I started to help her with the men's groups. And the thing about having me there was they couldn't bullshit me. I knew if they were genuine or not. I knew if they were trying to make excuses, and I could tell them because I've been there, done that. And the real life experience, the storytelling of real life experiences is what I believe is a huge tool in this area. So I worked with her for a little while, and then I met a guy named Vic Tamati who came to speak to our men's group one night, and I was pretty inspired by what he had to say and what he'd been through in his life, and struck up a bit of a conversation with him afterwards and struck up a friendship. Kept in contact on Facebook and stuff like that whenever he was in the area. About 6 months later, he goes, I'm coming through Levin, bro. Want to catch up for coffee? I went, yeah, man, sweet as. Met him at a cafe in Levin, and he wasn't alone. And he goes, actually, bro, it's not just a cup of coffee. I went, oh, what's up, bro? And he goes, man, I've been doing this work now for about 5 years and by myself. I'm travelling all over the country. I'm getting tired, man. I need a hand. I went, oh yeah? What do you mean need a hand? He goes, I want someone else to help me. And I went, what? Go around standing up in front of a room full of strangers, telling them my deep, dark secrets? Yeah, bro. Fuck off, man, not me. But what I'd done when I finished the course at the Horowhenua Violence and Prevention Program was I became part of a DVD. And I got a whole lot of my mates to jump on too because Nairi asked. So, Yep, we're doing it, boys. And we made a DVD, and it was around the journey of change. That DVD was only supposed to be for the Horowhenua Violence Intervention Program inductions, but the Ministry of Social Development and It's Not Okay campaign got hold of it, and now it's used all over the country as a tool for men's groups and stuff like that. So I said to Vic, nah man, that's not me. He said, well, just come and watch me do a few deliveries, bro. So I went with him a couple of times, and I saw the impact that he was having on some of the men in the audience. I thought, yeah, actually, I think I could be part of this. I want to be part of this. So I started going out there, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago whether I'd be standing up in front of a room full of strangers, telling them my deep, dark secrets, for the last 3 years, standing up in front of a room full of policemen without handcuffs, never would have entered into my train of thought. But I believe that I've been given an honour and a privilege to take a whole lot of shit that I dished out and some stuff that was dished to me as a kid, and to take a whole lot of negative and turn it into positives for other men and their families. That's why I first started doing this work, was to help other men. Like I said, it's evolved a little bit. So for the likes of the roomfuls of you people that are working in this area, to hopefully you have a different understanding, or a fuller understanding of how the type of man that you're dealing with. He's not just a wanker. He's not an arsehole. He's not a bad man. He's just got some bad behaviour that needs to be changed. And if you can be part of his journey to give him the tools that he needs to make those changes in his life, then that's what your role is. And like I said, you may not lead him all the way through this journey. You may just pass him on to someone else who passes him on to someone else. But if you're doing that bit, if you're the one that makes that initial contact and makes that connection with that guy, make sure whoever you pass him on to is doing a good job. Because there's a lot of people out there that are getting funded in this area, and they're shit at it. Bottom line. So make sure, because if they get a bad experience, you could knock them back another 10 years before they ask for help. They might not ever ask for help again. So make sure that the network that you're working with is a safe network. So that's me. That's my journey so far. I still have safety plans and everything in place. What that woman gave me, and what her in particular, Nairi, and that course gave me, was the skills and the tools that I should have been given in my own home as a kid, as to what it was to be a father, a man, and a partner. And these guys that are out there that you're going to continue, those families you're going to be dealing with all the time, they haven't had the opportunity maybe for someone to intervene to lead them on that journey. And the thing is, and I mean rightly so, so many of the agencies that are in this room and the agencies that have been around for years were all victim-based. And you were all set up for the bottom of the cliff. So an incident had to happen before you were called in. So now it's starting to move to that model of prevention, and we're starting to look at, let's stop this guy 2 miles back from the top of that cliff. And that's where we need to be heading. And the reality is you need to be working with perpetrators also. Because if you take a perpetrator out of the equation, what don't you have anymore? Victims. And the reality is, the majority of perpetrators have once been victims in their lives. And it's the fact that they've never had any help dealing with any of that is the reason why they are portraying some behaviours today and making some bad choices. So, bottom line is, don't ever give up on a fella like I used to be. keep that contact going. It might be the 30th time. You're going to get told to mind your own business 29 times. Or what would you know? How come it's all of a sudden not good when this is what happened to me all my life? All this sort of stuff is going to get chucked back at you, but please don't ever give up, because I truly believe that everyone and anyone is capable of change if they are committed enough and they get given the right tools to make that change. So thanks very much. That's me so far, and I've got a few more minutes, and I know there's a question time this afternoon, but there's not much time. So if anybody would like to ask me a few quick questions before we move on to Mike.
Take a couple of questions.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeremy, for your story. It's incredible to hear it. I was just interested to hear from you. You were abusing substances, and where's that in the picture of recovery from violence?
Okay. I still have a beer. I don't get drunk. Certainly taking away the amount of what I used to do, which was, and I mean, the crutch, whatever you want to call it, the coping mechanism for a lot of people. It certainly was having a heavy impact in my life before I started to make change. And I sort of worked out myself, which a lot, guys have got to get to, is that it's only a quick fix. It's only that evening or those few hours that you're drunk or whatever that you feel a bit better. So, and as I said earlier, for some guys, the actual catalyst of what they do is an excess of alcohol or drugs. So then that needs to leave their life altogether. You need to make changes. And again, if you've got a guy that's coming to anger management courses or something like that who's a drug addict, using meth, particularly nowadays, and all that sort of stuff, then he really needs to do A and D before he can start on a journey anywhere else. So if those are the main factors behind what they're doing, then that's what you have to address first. Yep.
Time for another one or two. Any other questions? Hello, I'm Lynn.
I'm Lynn. I was just wondering, as a young lad, what would have been, if somebody had been able to come into your space, what would have been a useful or a tool that would have helped you as a young one?
Good question. I think being introduced to the fact at a lot earlier age that things can be different. There's other lifestyles out there that are actually real. It's hard to say because it's that timing thing, And the thing is, if you put me next to a female perpetrator, female victim, and a male, as we grew up, our childhood stories would be fairly similar. But what happens is the woman will continue sometimes to be a victim of partners all her life. Where a boy gets to a certain age and the mantle switches and we start to become the perpetrators and stuff like that. So I get asked that question quite a bit, and I can think of the only possible thing that could have happened to me when I was a young father, when I had my young daughter in front of me, because the cycle has continued for me and my family. When we talk about the cycle of violence, I put a curse on my kids. My daughter's accepting behaviours from her partners now that she thinks is okay because of what I used to do, is acceptable and stuff. If someone had said to me, well, my little daughter was beside me, do you realise that your daughter's going to grow up accepting some stuff because of what she's seeing you do now? And everybody, like I said, even when we're in the throes of what we're doing, everyone's protective of their kids. And as funny as it was, like I said, I was hitting them and top level stuff, but I would protect them from anybody else.
The thought was that when you were a wee person,
Yeah.
and you weren't protected, what would have been best from your perspective?
Okay? If you're, if it's hard, yeah, be removed from that environment in one way or another. My 3 grandchildren have been removed by SIFs. And all those years that I had lots of police visits over the years and stuff like that, the gift of the gab guy always won. So I have no convictions for domestic violence, no protection orders, no nothing. I've got away with it scot-free. And I used to think that that was pretty cool back then. But I wish at some stage of my life, one of my mates, because of the sporting fields, I knew a few of the police officers that would come to my house. And I could talk my way around them. I wish one of them had held me accountable way back. Can't say that it might have made a difference, but it might have planted a seed a lot earlier. And it might have changed the direction of my life, you know. But I say no consequences for me. When my 3 grandchildren were taken about 2 years ago because of my past, I'm not allowed to be their caregiver. So my grandkids are with strangers. One's with their grandmother. And I can't be part of their life. So my consequences are ongoing for some behaviour that I used to have 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah, so thank you.
One more final
Oh, yeah.
question, Jeremy. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Kia ora, Jeremy. We're just from here, Wakatapu up here, and just really just want to thank you for your kōrero today. I know it's probably impacted many of us, and we just really want to mihi to you, just to say thank you, and it's been an honour and a privilege to listen to your kōrero today.
It's always hard. One of the biggest things is when I started this journey, was accepting accolades for being an arsehole. Very humbling every time. But also reassuring me that what I'm doing and what I'm saying is helping to make a difference. So, kia ora.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we're just going to take 5 minutes now before our next speaker sets up, so you can talk amongst yourself for 5 minutes. It's my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Michael Roguski to the stage, who's going to present to us, particularly from his background in terms of research in this field. He's also been part of the Family Violence Death Review, so really looking forward to hearing some of his thoughts and ideas on transformational change and how it's possible. So if you can welcome Dr. Michael.
That should be fine. Can you guys hear me? Kia ora koutou. I'm Michael Roguski from Te Aotearoa Tūwharetoa. When I was going through my training all those years ago, we were really taught to position ourselves, very social worky, sort of, my friends were social workers, I guess. I'm a criminologist. So, and I've found it really useful when I work in family violence to say, who am I? Why more than our pepeha? So I was in a meeting recently at the Family Violence Death Review, and we all went around the room about our motivation for being there. And so, because family violence has very much been part of my whole professional life, and it was only at that point when I said, it really occurred to me that because my mother was raped, I was the conception of rape. And I think it was one of those journeys, and so that's probably why family violence and the eradication of family violence is so important to me. I'm saying that because it's important, I mean, with Jeremy and his story, it's today what I'm talking about is other people's stories, but I want you to know that I'm not a conehead, that I just am not, I'm an academic, but this is very much my passion. Kia ora. Now, I just got to navigate the computer. So it was a few years ago, the Glen inquiry happened, and they asked me, they'd done all this work on victims of family violence, and they realised that they had, rightly so, been looking at women, but then they had didn't get the male voice, and that they said, like, can you do a study and like from a perpetrator point of view? And this is how this research came about, and it was a real honour. One of the things I've got to begin with is I feel very uncomfortable with the term perpetrator. One of the reasons is that I'm yet to interview a perpetrator who has not been a victim in their childhood at some point of their life. And it's a binary that I feel like we're using, and do forgive me as I will use the word perpetrator because I don't necessarily have another word and I can easily slip into it. But it's something that I need to be aware of, and I share that with you. I find that looking at a victim-perpetrator binary really limits our scope. Like, I just got a call before, and yet again from someone in the family violence community, and they're saying we just got to start thinking outside the box because we've been doing this for 40 years, we're still doing the same thing. And I think this is just one example, but that binary can keep us entrenched. Also, it reinforces a punitive response. It's all about blame, serving time, rather than listening to someone's story. And kia ora, Jeremy, like, I think we complement one another very, very well about, and I'll remember, what did you call it? The Game of Thrones, the box set. So today, I'm going to be also talking about another version of the box set, that we look at someone's, I call it the socio-historical self, those things in someone's social life and their history that have brought them to where they are now. And that also means to do that, to look at someone's social self, is to look at their family structure and the family dynamics that go with that. Finally, it can really minimalize a holistic understanding of the self. So what am I talking about? I'm going to talk about the research aims. I'll try and do that really briefly. The approach I took, the findings, and where to from here. Sorry, this screen is really, really small. Okay, so they really wanted to know what was the possible contributions of someone's childhood to the adult offending. They wanted to, and what led a perpetrator to acknowledging what they were doing was wrong. And the factors that contributed to delaying that acknowledgement. What led to desistance? What led to that person stopping, going back to offending again? And recommendations. So as a criminologist, I specialise in marginalised groups, but spending time and listening to their stories. Because what I've found is that it's too easy for the dominant group to start writing about, researching those who are marginalised. So the sort of work that I do, I just finished an evaluation of the children's team, but that was from the whānau perspective. I just got back from Tonga, so there I was listening to police about why they find it so difficult to respond to family violence. I spent a lot of time in prison looking at inmates and their need for human rights in prison. So my commitment to criminology is very much about the marginalised voice and giving voice to those who haven't been heard before. So what we did a literature review, and this should all be online. And I met with 26 participants, and I did in-depth interviews which really looked at it was their chronology of life. Very much like how Jeremy talked about, from beginning to end and where they are now. There was one female, and the phone call I just got before is that they want to start looking at female perpetrators' experiences because this is becoming more and more of an acknowledged issue. So in terms of childhood, the majority of participants reported having been exposed to various forms of family violence. In all cases, family violence manifested physically, but of these, half had also been exposed to verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse. 3 had been sexually abused in childhood. Similar to Jeremy's story, childhood exposure to violence became normalised. They learnt that violence is an appropriate behaviour and means of securing desire fulfilment. I want it now. And participants exposed to childhood violence attributed exposure to later family violence. It was very rare for someone to say their offending as an adult had nothing to do with their childhood. For the majority of participants exposed to family violence, no one had tried to intervene. So we've got to remember these people are now adults, so this is 20 and 30 years ago when they were children. But of the remaining 2 cases, one had a teacher that had questioned about the bruises, the welts on their legs, and the second was a child had been removed from the home. So I'm raising that too, and I think it's pertinent now, is that we still lack the knowledge about how to ask the questions, how to intervene. So it's still a real issue, but it was very much an issue 20 to 30 years ago. So all participants believe that the appropriate early intervention would have prevented their later use of violence. Non-intervention was linked to normalisation and acceptance of violence within participants' communities. So I asked people about their journey to acknowledging that they needed to change. Everyone described behaviour and attitude change as a journey, where positive experiences had a cumulative impact, building upon each one. But it was a very windy, difficult journey, often with 1 step forward, 3 steps back. And again, Jeremy, I really tautoko your kōrero. That's you.
I think that little niggly thing, that gut feeling that tells you it's wrong, is educating you along the way until you get to, I suppose, the big turning point where you start to do something about it. You don't realise it until you get to your turning point. It's a long pathway, or it could be a short one for some. Before the fist closes and you throw a punch, I think before I bumped into the ultimate turning point, I started to make changes inside my 4 walls. I started to tell myself that I wanted to be better, even though I didn't know how to. I was making subtle changes there.
So there are 2 camps of people that came up in the research in terms of acknowledging the need to stop offending. A very small number stress that perpetrators know that family violence is wrong but do not possess the knowledge about how to change. And I really do stress that this was a very small number. The majority of participants stress that family violence is so normalised that they lack the awareness that violence was actually wrong. Number 1. So there are 4 types of journeys that I identified. There's maturation, there's informal community connections, there's sudden realizations, and non-violence programs. So about half of the participants acknowledged the unacceptability of family violence with increasing age and maturity. So I'm doing some work at the moment with some patched whānau. And so the leaders of the whānau are now grandparents, great-grandparents. Theirs is a really excellent example of maturation because they want to turn away from crime and engage in pro-social activities because they don't want their moko to go through this. That's just the best example of maturation there is. So they were motivated for this study because they realised that they had to find a way to refrain from violence. They had a real dissatisfaction with their lifestyle and they wanted something better, and they wanted a desire to break away from intergenerational cycles of violence. Number 2. Blair, be number 2.
In my 30s, I realised I was not okay. I had separated from my wife and met up with my ex-partner. I decided that family violence wasn't the way to go. I'd seen things myself and decided that it didn't work that way, so let's try it this way. I saw that I was getting better results by being more open, honest, and not as violent with my partner. And I think she was even surprised.
So in terms of those who engage in maturation, this was a real long self-reflection journey. It was often done in isolation. They hadn't anyone to go to for support, and it was very much about isolation. It was isolated because they didn't have anywhere to go to access support, or didn't know where to go to access support. And there was a real dissatisfaction. If they had managed to access support, there was a dissatisfaction with the type of support they were offered. So one of my participants, for instance, he'd been out of prison, and he was sent, someone had advised him to go see a clinical psychologist. Didn't want it because in prison, his experience with a clinical psychologist was a half-hour meeting where there's a table and someone's writing about you, not taking time to know you, and it was all very, very deficit. So like his experience with mental health intervention or support was all about part of a punitive response. It wasn't anything there to do with trust.
At 27, when I got married, after a month or two, all the same came after me. It was pure rage, completely losing the plot, which was a lot of behaviours that I thought I had dealt with. Then I realised that there was all this stuff that was really deep down in my life that I had never dealt with. I went looking for help because I didn't want to be like that. And you know the hardest thing? I couldn't find anyone. I went to a highly recommended psychologist, which I found pretty much useless. They only told me really what I already knew. There was just no connection. It was too clinical, too academic. There was just nothing there.
The other thing that came out very strongly from participants about a clinical intervention was a sense of judgment. So in my early days, I studied clinical psychology. And in those days, again, many years ago, all of our training was really about the victim. The perpetrator was inherently bad. And we didn't really talk about the perpetrator. It was just assumed badness. And I don't know, I mean, I left psychology quite a while ago, but I wonder now how much of our mental health training is really about understanding where perpetrators come from, where they're at. And if we do engage in a deficit model, then we really need to challenge that, because my people, that's what they experience now. By far the best means of my participants engaging in a journey of change was through informal community connections. So in Jeremy's story, how you met Vic Tamati, that's a typical story of an informal connection. The heart of it is mentorship, purely by luck. People were able to meet someone who was further along in the journey, and they were able to take them under their wings and lead them along a path. It was very, very similar to an NAAA model. There was no judgment. I've been there. People, possibly because of the fear or distrust of a clinical intervention, the informal community connection was, there was a respect there as well, because actually it was quite freaky when I was doing the interviews. Everyone used the term, a clause, they've walked in my shoes. That was really, really important for my people, that they were mentored by someone who knew their lived reality, as opposed to, I think, what that guy was talking about, the book learning, the academic learning, someone who'd actually been there.
Well, for a start, when you know someone and you trust them, and I'll use Vic as the example, I know what Vic's been through, what I've been through, and all that. You can trust that there'll be no judgment and there's an understanding. Whereas a counsellor is just someone who's done a degree and been to university and that, and got their shit together, and 9 times out of 10 they haven't been through what you're talking to them about. So I guess it's just that they can relate to what you're going through and what's been going on, and you just feel safe talking to them about it, because judgment is pretty scary, and it's an intimidating thing that you're going to be judged and shamed.
I was just remembering another participant. He'd saved up all this money to go to see a clinician. The clinician used the hour, I think it was, to do an assessment. This guy was gutted. He wanted to be equipped with some knowledge about how to combat. Like, where these days we talk about acknowledging the red flags, having a safety plan, leaving the house at the first sign of conflict, like developing something. But the clinician had spent the hour getting the history. So this guy, he knew that he's on a long journey, but he left with no tools, not even this most simple tool. And so he never went back because he just saw it as a waste of time. So I think it's that thing about understanding where our people are coming from so we can respond to them when they first come to us. And we all have to do assessments, but for my people here, they needed immediate tools. The sudden realization. So this is the other component of my people. And of the remaining participants, none had had previous insights into their violence. The impact of abuse occurred suddenly and led to dramatic change in attitude and great efforts to seek assistance. The sudden realization fell into two primary types: empathy and potential loss. So within this, it was the hitting rock bottom. So losing your kids. So everything was tickety-boo. It was just, violence was just normalized within the family, and all of a sudden, the possibility that you're going to lose your children, that was a wake-up call. It was just absolutely hitting rock bottom. That was just a story with this group of people that was very, very common.
One thing that really did open my eyes to the result of violence and the flow on peace from the victim's point of view was coming here and working for Te Whakaruruhau. Just seeing what victims go through. We help the women who are on the receiving end of that, and I thought, that's awesome. It was my kids back in 2008 when I was 44. I was arrested for assaulting my kids. I'd been a perpetrator for years, but when I got arrested, I realised that I'd carried on. That if I'd carried on, I was going to start losing my wife and kids. I hated the thought of being single for the rest of my life.
So that first quote, if you can remember, so Te Wharereho is up in Hamilton, fantastic refuge. And they had an arrangement with, what's it called, the prison there? Doesn't matter, the prison there. So guys would come and do jobs around the prison. It happened that the guys that were coming had a history of family violence, but it really wasn't necessarily known by Te Wharereho. So that was, the first quote is what I meant by the empathy. So one day, one of the Te Wharereho was rung up. There'd been a very violent incident that night. Windows were broken, there was blood on the walls, the floor, and so the guys said, please go along, repair it, fix it, clean it. So with this guy, he had no realization about the impact of his offending before he went into prison. He wasn't in prison for male assaults female, he was in prison for something else. And it was seeing the outcome of the violence, the destruction, that was his wake-up call. So that's what I mentioned by the empathy. Non-violence programs. So people had really mixed responses to non-violence programs. The majority reported little impact of court-ordered attendance. They've been forced to go. They don't want to be forced to go. They're angry. You're making me do something. You're not in the right frame of mind to have some sort of therapeutic insight, generally, because you're being forced to go. Some linked positive impacts, however, to sharing experiences within a group environment. For many people, being able to share a story was really positive, but the success was completely reliant on feeling safe, and that safety was always associated with the facilitator having walked in their shoes. So I also, about 6 months ago, finished a project for Salvation Army up north, and one of the things there was I interviewed some guys in their non-violence program, And some of them had been talking about how they weren't court ordered. And they had found it really, really extremely difficult because they'd identified power and control issues within them, attitudinal sort of power and control issues. So they'd sought out a voluntary program. So one of the programs in Counties Manukau, they were charging $1,500 for self-referral. So I'm just saying this in terms of early intervention, prevention. Our system is very geared to a punitive, court-ordered response. So we've got great messaging out there, like people like Jeremy and Vic and yourselves, but our system is geared on going through a criminal justice response. And please, in the break, please tell me how things are in Christchurch about if someone wants to self-refer, how easy is that? Am I getting a phone?
No, no.
When I first started teaching the non-violent programming, I didn't want to be there. It was just another course. But then I got into it and I started realising what the program was doing. Sorry. But then I got into it and I started realising what the program was doing. My turning point was telling my story. And there was a big eye, and that was a big eye-opener for me. Telling the whole class what I did. It gave me the courage to speak out in front of my class, and I felt really good when I did bring it out. And it made me more confident in myself. Programs need to be facilitated by people who have been there, telling their stories. They open your eyes.
So, do we need a 5-minute break, or are you happy to carry on? How bored are you? Carry on? If you think that this is getting, put up your hand and we can all do a jig or something, okay? So what are the barriers to acknowledging that family violence, attitude and behaviour change? So there's normalisation of violence, patriarchal attitudes and behaviour and denial, alcohol and drugs, interpersonal relationships, partners and support. I'm going to talk about each one. So Jeremy, I should have just gone home really. The normalisation of violence was reported as the biggest barrier to acknowledging that you need to change. But, you talked about this too, and it's very much associated with constructions of masculinity, patriarchal views and behaviours towards women, supporting the right of the male to intimidate and be violent. And for me, if I was doing a community change, I'd be looking at sideline abuse in sports. That so reflects the wellness of our community. How are the parents treating the referee and the children from, like, it's crazy shit. You got to admit. And so when I talk about hypermasculinity or toxic masculinity, that for me is the litmus test of how well we're doing at the moment. The stuff that I'm seeing is crazy.
I was brought up in an environment where physical ability wasn't frowned upon. The teachers reinforced it, but it became the verbal abuse. To us it was normal. Even the police would take me home knowing that an old man was kissing his ear.
I wasn't taught how to be a good man. My dad taught me a man is angry, aggressive, abusive, violent. That's the role model I grew up with. So I'm thinking, how are you supposed to be when you become a man? You don't want to look weak. You don't want to seem soft. Your reputation is everything.
It's really interesting that one of you asked Jeremy about alcohol and other drugs in his journey. So half the participants said that AOD, alcohol and other drugs, was a factor. And it was interesting that very few of them actually gave up completely, just like you, but they became functional users. And I found that interesting as the guy doing the research, you know, yeah. But everyone would say that alcohol and drug, they needed to get control of it because and acknowledgement that it was factoring in somehow. So you're in a system, your mates, everybody lives in a closed geographical community, and within that geographical community, people often have the same understandings about life, violence, relationships. And that became a barrier because of those shared understandings. It can perpetuate, and at least when you're trying to stop, it's a barrier. So that's just a normalisation of violence within a closed community, really. And it was closely linked to drug, alcohol and drug abuse. So what happened too was that it was actually very, very sad, and this goes back to the isolated journey that I was talking about before. So many people I interviewed, they would uproot themselves and say they're living in Wellington, they moved to Invercargill. They wanted completely new beginnings. And that was risky because they had no form of social support at all, but they had a desire to break away, to get into something positive without knowing what positive was. They just knew that they had to break away.
I had to let go of my friends because all my mates, they were still stuck in the same old rut, and I needed to get rid of them so I could change.
A lot of fellas, when they get out of jail, they re-offend. They fall back into the same habits, because they've gone back to the same communities, gone back to the same families, gone back to the same victims. So they know nothing else but to re-offend.
So I guess the challenge there is, of those who provide support and programs, is there something that can be done, or are you doing, I want to hear this in the break too, that can support people who want to break out of their social network in a positive way, that they're not actually isolated, because there are other risks, of course, that go when you're isolated. This is contentious. Participants stress that it's vital for partners to simultaneously access some form of transformative support while they're attempting to deprogram. So what happened is, Joe, he gets a little bit of realisation that something's wrong. Goes along to some form of support, a program, mentorship or whatever, and he starts learning some really cool stuff. He learns about red flags, he learns about safety plans, he learns about disparaging words, whatever. His female partner, she's seen this before, he's made all the promises in the world. And she, and this is part of my journey too, I remember my dad coming back home from the pub, doing the normal thing, and just waiting for it to explode. And so when they were talking about the need for partners, I put myself in there trying to understand someone's narrative, of course. And when I've talked to female victims, it is they just want the explosion to occur. Waiting for the eruption of violence is more of a mindfuck than the actual hit. So they would actually, some of the, because I also met the female partners after, I should have said that no one was interviewed unless they'd gone through, I think it was 2 years of being violence-free, okay? So when I talked to the female partners, their journey was sabotage is a good word. They would actually sabotage it. Like, he's on this journey of change, I just don't bloody well trust it. And it was doing their head in. It was just in terms of psychological abuse. And so they would sabotage it, do something to try and make him erupt, the violence to erupt. So what was a real lesson for these whānau was that if she can go, and the children, because I'd very much take a systems model in this, if the family can go simultaneously, not to the same thing of course, but if there's a way to work with the whānau, that everyone's on the same journey, then there's more likely to have success. Working in isolation with a male perpetrator without working with a family is like pissing in the wind. When I was told that this is a church, I got a bit scared.
But also
seriously, out of anything that's shared today, I personally believe that's the most important part of their narrative. So barriers, insufficient support. So basically, accessing is really difficult. We forget that within urban centres, we're more likely to have something, but I did interviews in Gisborne, well, all over, and provincial areas, there's bugger all there. So, and it's hard enough within an urban area, and I talked about the $1,500 for a self-referral, access is still a real issue. The perceptions and experience with mental health providers. Those negative experiences, not only in prison, but the importance of the first interaction with a clinician is just so vital. If I talked to a clinician recently, and they do an assessment, but it's more verbal. They document it over later on, and the whole interaction is making that person feel equipped, welcome, warm, like they are affed. And it's not a sense of, I'm taking notes about you. And because it's very common for the participants to say, well, what the hell are they writing down about me? And it's that sense of being, yet again, pathologized. A lack of post-program support. Now, this is the most ridiculous thing. So you can go to your court-ordered program, which completely ignores that, as Jeremy talks about, as change it's taken you to this point to learn these negative behaviours. Therefore, you've probably got quite a long time to go to unlearn these negative behaviours. So we go to a program, let's say it's 10 weeks, you're on your own. So just so bloody ridiculous. So that person, just when they're getting a little bit of confidence and support, they're on their own. So in my job, I'm really, really lucky, and I've managed to evaluate some programs which use a mentorship sort of graduations model, like and there's a marae in Lower Hutt, and they do it. So you go into a non-violence program. At the end of 12 months, you become a mentor. At the end of 24 months, you have a different role within it. But you never actually leave the program unless you want to. And that has just had such huge success. And so again, in the break, I'd love to know what you're doing down here. Outside of, well, is that a problem here in terms of a time-limited program versus other ways that could be more holistic, that someone is on, that embraces the fact that they're on a journey?
Only those who have walked in my shoes can understand where I've been.
You're exposed to this world of wellness, and you kind of grasp that, and it's so awesome. The next minute you're out of here on your own.
So other research has identified that support from others is really important. The use of acquired skills, like breathing exercises, leaving a situation if you feel like your blood pressure is going up, that sort of stuff. A supportive and positive environment, a new understanding of their relationship. What my participants talked about was the importance in terms of sustained change, working alongside their partners. Developing violence-free networks. That was really, really hard. And again, there was too much luck involved. It was just, because and it really worries me. It was just too much luck, meaning it would be very, very easy for them not to develop violence-free networks, because where do you go? How do you, when it's so normalised and you need to break out of that bubble, how the hell do you develop a violence-free network? And this is again where I talk about some people who had just left their location very drastically in an attempt. One of them, when he moved up north, he accidentally met someone who wanted to take him fishing. He was down at the wharf. So this person ended up taking fishing out on a boat. From there, he was invited to dinner. But that's what I mean about the luck. Where would he have been if he hadn't met this one person? Sobriety. That was really important. No one said that they gave up alcohol altogether, but was having the realization that they could get it manageable.
Now, I have support in the community. Exes in my group. Things get tough, I can just go around the corner and see him. He's a good support person for me. You know, and we can support each other.
If you're dealing with things in isolation, your partner doesn't understand that. One person's all excited because they're making these changes. Another person is just looking at them saying, yeah, we'll see how long this lasts, sort of thing. So I think it has to be done together.
So where to from here? Far too small for me to read. Sorry, I did this at 3 o'clock in the morning, and this is all very new. So what I'm talking about is the real need for a holistic appreciation of the self. And the self is about the whānau. The self is about whanaungatanga and where we've come from. So I call it the socio-historic understanding of family violence. And I guess it's a challenge that I'm putting out. You don't have to agree with me, and I'd really like to hear from you where you are in this. But it's just, when I listen to these people's stories, this is the only sense that I get, the only thing that seems logical. So to do this, it means understanding the individual's social and historical self, and definitely refraining from victim-perpetrator binaries. I find that when I do that, when I'm with someone, I use it as an indication just to stop, that I'm not actually listening to them. But that's what I do for myself. Like if I'm thinking victim, it's just, I just back off a bit and I think, stop yourself listening, respect this person and listen to their story. So that's what I do. I strongly suggest that we can really benefit from a systems analysis rather than an individual analysis on the perpetrator or an individual analysis on the victim. I really worry about models that don't include the children, and so I really do push a whānau model where we can respond as a holistic whānau unit. We need to provide support and interventions that are definitely not singular focused. I'm yet to meet people who, again, please tell me, but how many programs are there here where someone isn't automatically assessed for their need for AOD, alcohol and other drug support? For me, if I had all the money in the world and I was setting up a program, I'd have AOD as a key component of that program. Coming to me for my 10-week, 12-week program without that is pissing in the wind. Okay. The other thing is budgeting advice, financial assistance. A lot of people that participated in this and the other studies that I've done, there is financial need. So again, if I had all the money in the world, I would have a social worker as part of my team. I don't want my person, my client, to have to go down the road to AOD. They don't want to have to retell their story to another stranger. It's, again, how can we combat the shame? They're there to change. So is there the possibility of having a system where they come for, the whānau come for support on the journey of transformation and healing and change, but at the same time, those negative contributors, such as lack of money, AOD, housing, to what extent can that all be done as a one-stop shop, as opposed to, and again, my indicator is, if I'm referring someone where they have to tell their story again, how is that mana enhancing? Okay, this one's also contentious, but I believe it's time to move away from a simplistic understanding of family violence and of offending. So offending is no longer restricted to intimate partner violence. So when I hear family violence, and you talked about this really well, Jeremy, we know that there's verbal, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial. There can be perpetrators in all different stages of life, genders within that. I just finished a study on the abuse of disabled people residing in the community. Financial abuse was happening by far because through the daughter of the older person. Within family violence, we're not talking about the rise of geriatric abuse. That's still family violence. So when I think family violence, I'm not thinking intimate partner, because again, that's an indication to me that maybe I'm being a little bit tunneled vision about what family violence is. Family violence is across gender, it's across age. Yes, I'm very worried about intimate partner violence, where men are by far the common perpetrator. But if we really want to do something about family violence in Aotearoa, we broaden our scope. So again, my indicator is if I think family violence and I'm thinking intimate partner violence, I think I'm self-listening. I've got to stop. I've got to just have less tunnel vision and start thinking more broadly. I don't know if you've read Michael Johnson. Anybody read Michael Johnson? So he's a guy who talks about a pyramid. I like pyramids. The pyramid, it's like a bloody iceberg. So he still respects each of the types of violence, and he talks about the intimate partner at the top, at the very top. So that reflects the proportion of that. The intimate partner, the intimate terrorist is the sort of, if you ever saw Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts, that psychopathic, the textbook sort of perpetrator. Then it goes down the pyramid, just from near the bottom. He talks about situational couple violence. And in my work, and I want to hear this from you too, it's getting really, really common that we're acknowledging, and in terms of police safety orders, this is very common, that the male and the female partner engage in dysfunctional communication patterns. It's not often, it doesn't often erupt in terms of physical violence, but that's when the police are called, because they're in a cycle of just yelling, screaming, treating another very, very badly. It's dysfunctional. And I think it's really important, if we're going to talk about prevention, early intervention, to be focusing on this group of people, because there is a chance that it will erupt in physical violence at some point. But it's the major contributor there is people aren't knowing how to communicate in a manner-enhancing way. And it can turn into a cycle. It exposes the children, as Jeremy was talking about, to really negative learning about how to be appropriate in a relationship. Almost there, okay? So our criminal justice response often means relying on court-ordered programs. From participant stories, that there's a real chance that this isn't working. We know that there are some real challenges to anyone that comes from a court-ordered program, because they just don't want to be there. If I told you you had to go and do something next week, do you want to do it? Are you in a psychological space for a therapeutic intervention? So what's the alternative? But this is the challenge. I don't have the answers. I'm just saying that this is a challenge. Because we also talk in the family violence community about prevention, engagement, early intervention. But when our work is primarily based with clients who are coming to us because of the criminal justice response, what's that about? So what I liked about the evaluation I did on the children's team was it wasn't a punitive response. From the whānau's voice, these whānau that I interviewed, they had spent years often trying to access support. Through the children's team, all of a sudden they were linked in. It wasn't seen as punitive, they wanted it. Even though the children's team was there because of a potential escalation of risk around a child, the children's team model worked with grandma, child, mum, dad, as actually a holistic whole. And they dealt with things like dysfunctional communication patterns, but in a very non-punitive way. And I've been reflecting on that lately in terms of early identification and engagement. That children's team model as a non-criminal justice response seemed like a really interesting way forward. So I call it the medical model. So again, my indication, when you come to a therapeutic encounter that is time limited, that doesn't include the whānau, that's traditional medical model in terms of my jargon. So why would we do that to our people? Why would, if we all know that transformation is a lifetime journey, why would we limit their journey to, let's say, 6 weeks, 10 weeks? Like, I mean, really, why do we do that? So the socio-historic model says, let's just remove the treatment model out of it and let's look at how we can work holistically with the whānau group. And then the socio-historic model, I was talking about sideline abuse. Those wider messages in society that really push hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity. I know a lot of you may not be involved in social marketing. I actually don't know anything about you. And you can tell me over the break. But it's very hard, it must be very frustrating if you are program-based, therapeutic-based or support-based to do all this great work outside of a wider social marketing change. And I'd really like to talk to you about that too, because otherwise we're just dealing with cases as opposed to community change. Actually, I lied. I've got one more slide. This is just, I can read this one out. This sort of summed it up with me for someone who'd been on a very long journey. I'm still dealing with a lot of things, but I'm able to manage these things. It's an everyday thing. I still have to check myself. Kia ora.
Hang on, technical issues. We've got to wait for the green light. Thank you, Michael. I thought that was really entertaining. Oh, what a lovely picture.
Unplug it.
Oh,
So that's, okay, I'll just
oh that's not
So Michael's actually finished, and thank you, that's actually really quite thought-provoking in terms of some of the research and really reinforced a lot of what Jeremy was saying too, which is great to see your research coming through with that perspective as well. We've actually got about 20 minutes now where we can have some questions for either Jeremy or for Michael. So happy to take that. Do you want to come up? Anyone got any questions or anything that they would like to ask of either? Talk about the work that's going on down here, because Michael's going to be having lots of conversations by the sounds of it. Oh, we've got an arm up. Celine.
Was that okay?
Thank you so much, Michael. I actually just wondered whether we can have your slides, whether they would be available.
Yes.
Save taking so many notes. Thank you.
I just wondered how your research is going forward and how it can move, like support government making decisions around programs that are mandatory versus programs that are available for people whenever they need them.
Yeah. I get called to government, different ministries quite often, and I've presented this to different ministries and they all go great, but I think they're caught in a loop and they don't know how to get outside of that loop. It's easier perhaps to fund a program as opposed, they don't trust the NA model, the AA model, the idea of mentorship. So Vic Tamati has been trying to set up Safe Man, Safe Family for a number of years, which is very much mentors looking after. So his original idea, which needs to be piloted, is that Safe Man, Safe Family, a vetted mentor, would possibly go along with the police on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday to a PSO. So rather than the police bounding the individual, Safe Man, Safe Family could take the individual back to a safe house where they could gently sort of show not just a house, but it has a therapeutic aspect where they could expose that person to alternative realities. But I think it's that perpetrator thing, that perpetrators are bad, even though they're now violence-free and they've done some courses or whatever. how can we trust that perpetrator? You know what I mean? So that we're caught in a bit of there's a tension there. And I would just love to see that piloted. Because what we're doing with bound individuals is generally, well, you're out of the house for up to 5 days. But this is an opportunity to actually put them in a really positive environment, to expose them maybe for the first time to an alternative reality. So, did I answer your question?
Just a question I set up over here.
Hi, I'm from Stopping Violence Services, and so we run our perpetrator programs, and I think that there are, not many organisations actually here in Christchurch who do that. So, and it's great listening to both of you talk, and totally agree with, so much of what you're saying. It really reinforces our work, so thank you for that, both of you. I guess, again, and we've gone and spoken to a lot of community probation clients, and we say the same thing, when you're forced to come and do something, of course, I don't want to do it if I'm forced to come and do something. I guess for us, we really have to roll with that resistance in the hope that that seed is planted while they're going through that 5 sessions of, I don't want to be here. So I guess it's that hope, holding on, instilling that little bit of hope that actually, yep, we get you don't want to be here, we know it, and we roll with that, and the hope that towards the end, that mindset changes, and certainly from our experience that is what happens. So I guess with lack of any other model and anything else available, when we say to them, hey, this program's really expensive, make the most of it, take from it what you can, because actually it is harder to access if you don't choose, if you choose to do it. So, but yeah, so.
Hello, I also work with SVS, but part of the ISR Perpetrator Outreach Service, and most of our work is in the prison, and it's non-mandated, and so we do go into the prison and we do offer this as part of the pilot. And I think I've been involved since it first started over 2 years ago, and I think there's only 2 men. We just have to go in blind, basically, unless there's some sort of case manager who can set it up. But only 2 men, in my experience, in all that time, have not wanted to engage with someone. And I think that's a phenomenal amount. The other thing is that there's, again, only 2 men that have not wanted to carry on with the work. Now this is also, and most of them have never missed a session. And the thing I just want to really briefly say is that I think the therapeutic process is one about experience. That's the key. And if I was to really name it in one word, it's love. What it feels to me in listening to the stories and the thematic idea that comes through constantly is a lack of love. Interesting, with your experience with your first mentor, that was a loving experience. I mean, that's when the tears comes. It happens all the time. When I'm available to be there in a loving way, and just with that gentleness or whatever, non-judgmentalness, consideration, respect, it does create a relational experience that I think I'm providing. My only job is to hopefully provide that kind of experience, and then we've got a relationship. It's a relational experience, this work. Probably some people here are sick of me talking about it, but I've been on about this for years, and particularly with the pilot. I offer a therapeutic process. It's not a wraparound service, it isn't part of that, but I'm actually working therapeutically, hopefully providing some way that this guy, through loving him, his decision to love himself, is going to actually do something, a choice for change. And that's pretty much simply it, really.
Just one of the team from Hei Wakatapu is just going to have a little bit of a chat to you. I didn't twist his arm, I promise. Thanks, Damo.
Gee, kia ora. Leanne twisted my arm just to give a bit of a spiel, and maybe it's because maybe she's one of the funders for what we do. So yeah, I thank you for your kōrero, both of you. And family violence is obviously massive in Canterbury alone, in Christchurch. And so I come up with the idea of a phone number called 0800 Hayboro. And so that's to have men engage who feel they're going to harm a loved one or whānau member. And it's 24/7. So we have a few, through the funding, we've got to employ a couple more people that work on that phone 24/7. So it's a bit of a plug, the number's there. It's actually nationwide. So we get calls from Auckland, Wellington, Hamilton, Hawke's Bay as well. So our service is set up just to, intervene, de-escalate, and find the right services in the area that they're in. So I don't know, we've got to start somewhere, and we've all got one of these, and so it's a free number. So thanks for putting me on the spot there. You can also look on the He Wakatapu page. There is an 0800 Hayboro number on there, so it's free. Thanks.
I think probably the thing about that I wanted to highlight was just that prevention work and exactly what Jeremy was saying about intervening at the right time for that person, and that's what that provides. Oh, was that you? Hang on, we've got another question here as well. You can go first.
Kia ora. I was just saying to also the bahi that we're doing here in Christchurch at the moment, and one of them is working in the precinct. So when you're talking about getting them at their vulnerable list and going out there, what Vic Tamati was talking about, actually going into the precinct to talk to them and offering the supports. So working one-on-one with the perpetrator, but it's also funded by SAR. So it's been a success. It's only been about 2 months, but the impact or the feedback that we get from them is that we've never had this before. We've been in a dark space and with no one telling us what's going on, and they've been over there for the weekend or for a length of time, and no one's engaged with them. So it's a starting point, but then after that, it's when the rest of the services that sit in this room get to do their part as well. So it's a collective.
Just while we're moving there, there's one thing that always happens wherever I go all over the country. Mike will be the same. You probably all notice it yourselves when you go somewhere. We're talking about the majority of perpetrators being males and making changes for men. And out of the 250 people here that are here today, there's 230 women.
Well,
and it's trying to get, how do we, if you can tell Michael, at some stage while you're having that conversation, how do we get the men to engage in this? It's hard enough to get them to engage as a perpetrator or something like that, to actually do what I do now and try and help other men and stuff like that. It's men that need to lead this change, and it's, we're lacking in it. It's about getting the men to engage, and how do we? Yeah.
I don't really have a question, to be fair. I'm a social worker. I work just with men, and when a man is removed from the family home, they're brought to the night shelter. There is no place for them to go. So they spend 2 days, 3 days, maybe 5 days in the night shelter. We have guys that aren't meant to make contact with their women, vice versa. Who texts us first? Wait, the woman. The stories that they are bringing in, they're using their children to bring the men back into that role, but if the man doesn't do what she wants, once again, they ring the police, the texts are given to the police. The men are always in the wrong. Everybody looks at the male being in the wrong. Like love, they're so easy to love. I just don't have to like what necessarily the guys have done, but you need to love another human being to help them move forward. And I wouldn't work anywhere else but in the men's services of the City Mission. And as I said, I've been there nearly 14 years, and it's the most amazing job. But we need to look at changing how we work with men. It's always been very woman-focused, victim-focused, and so many of my men have been abused by their aunts, their mothers, their sisters, let alone other men. But there are women that do this to our men. And I've really appreciated both of your stories today. They've been amazing. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Your work. Oh, we've got questions.
Hi there. Thank you very much for both of you. It's been really important to hear your messages and just reinforces why we do what we do. Couple of things. Hallelujah, someone recognised that time is a factor. Because we're not on a conveyor belt, people. It takes a lot of time to undo what's learnt behaviour and really support these people through that. So thank you for both of you for mentioning that. But one thing I just wanted to ask, I'm really interested into moving into the area of working with perpetrators and stuff. Just wanted to gauge your thoughts around women doing that work. So all my work is primarily with high risk victims. But through that work, it's starting to evolve, and I'm now starting to work with their partners to try and bring them on board and stuff. So I really just want to gain your thoughts on women in my role actually going in and doing that work. Have you seen that before? Is it effective? Is there any tips that I could take? I've taken a lot already, so.
So I was involved with Te Whare Rere o Meri up in Otahuhu, and there was someone there, they worked as a male-female team, typical DV model. That was really, really successful, but I think a lot of it was what she brought to it. And I know it's a bit weak, but that X factor, you know, that factor that we can all bring to our work, which makes someone safe versus not. And do you have an advisory group of former clients?
No, not at this point.
Or consumer group or anything? I rely on my consumer group. If it was me, what the hell do I know? But I always go back to my people, whatever piece of work I am. Like if I do research, I always have an advisory group, which is usually people from the community that I do it with. And I don't think gender is a negative at all. It's the X factor. You look as though you've got X factor.
Oh, absolutely. I try to anyway, but yeah, just want the best for our whānau, so just want to make sure I am doing right what I am doing, so always checking in. And
I personally don't think gender is a facilitator or a barrier. It's about the person.
I think you're right, exactly that, Mike. And what it is that, like, Nairi is still in my life to this day. She's a woman who looks after me with what the work I'm doing now. She's my mentor, so I still go back to her and everything like that. And what it is what the most important thing you need to have or gain from that person is trust, whether you're male or female. If you have that factor that can draw them in, if you're genuine enough with them, if you're going to offer some help, then make sure you back up what you're going to say. If you're going to, I'm going to call you every week, or I'll be here for you 24/7, then you need to start doing that, because as soon as they get a knockback, they start to lose the trust again, you know. So it can be either, I mean, I just said here that I'd love to see 250 men sitting here, but the way it's working, and for me it was a female that brought me through, and the majority of it is that it's you women that are leading the change for men. But if for perpetrators in particular, it's getting that trust and the non-judgment. You know, working in an area that AA that I spoke about, that approach and attitude, if you have that, and a love, because along with trust that was stolen from me was, I don't remember too many nice days with my mum or anything like that, you know what I mean, or family days and all that sort of stuff, so there's no love either. So a family unit or something like that for a lot of these guys doesn't mean too much to them as far as, you know, as it is. So yeah, it's that trust thing. As long as you're the right person to gain trust, then you can lead anybody, male or female, through their journey.
Okay, we've got time for one more real quick question. We have got the panel this afternoon, so just so you remember. And then it's lunch. So pressure on you.
I promise I won't hold you guys up from lunch. Hello, and thank you guys both for speaking to us today. My name is Stacey, and I'm a probation officer. So I'm really interested to hear, you know, a lot has been spoken about court-ordered and court-mandated programs, and we straight away off the bat come off as an authority figure in our offenders' lives and how we work with them. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what sort of approach I can take in my practice every day to working with the people that I work with to offer that support and that platform for some sort of change.
So do you have a referral source?
Yep, so we make our referrals, but I'm more meaning like, so if someone has programs to do, yep, absolutely, I refer them to a program. But, you know, I think it's still really important in my own, in those report-ins that we have weekly, you know, that's a big chunk of time that we have with someone that we can work with them to make those changes or to support the changes that they're making within those programs and within their personal lives. But what sort of approach can I take in my daily practice to working with someone that kind of takes down those barriers of authority and of the fact that they have been sentenced by a judge to come and see me every week, you know, to kind of just take those barriers down a little bit.
I just wonder, like, this is the only bit of knowledge I have about that is very small, but I know people who have gone through any therapeutic change, it sounds like that would be a great opportunity for you to help them process where they are in that change. What are your lessons from the program you went to last week? You know what I mean? Because sometimes vocalizing it, you know, is the first time the penny's dropped. So it sounds, keeping in mind that I know this much about your question, it sounds like it's an opportunity to reinforce learnings from that week. That's all I got, I'm afraid.
No, that's
all
fantastic.
I got.
Thank you.
It still comes down to the X factor and showing them and what we've been living in with perpetrators, if you're talking about dealing with perpetrators, is the worry of judgment. A lot of the times, particularly because of our behaviour, but we're not identifying that, we're not showing respect by people that we run into, by organisations that come into our world. So just showing a bit of respect for them as a person and realising that that it is a behaviour or a belief that you're trying to change, that they're not a bad person, and reassuring that with them. I'm not here to judge you. I know you've been mandated to do this program, but I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if I didn't have a love for what I want to do, and I actually want to help you. So being genuine with them and reinforcing the fact that it's not just a JOB to you will help maybe make that connection with perpetrators.
Okay, so can we just have a final round of applause for Jeremy and Michael? Now, just before we head out to lunch, Blee's just going to talk to you about this afternoon's session.
Thank you, guys. Just a quick word. I learnt at morning tea that you're a bit like herding cats. So after lunch, we want to kick off the elections this afternoon at 1:15, so we've got a little over half an hour for lunch. In here will be the elective around working with children and non-abusive parents, and there's a lot of you that have ticked off for that one. So many, in fact, that there's going to be a couple of slightly emptier rooms out here for the other electives, and I'm wondering if we can mix it up a bit, particularly if you're from an organisation and a lot of you have elected for the same thing. If you can talk amongst yourselves at lunch. We have some incredible presenters this afternoon. So through in here we'll have Catherine, who's going to be talking about, like I said, working with children and non-abusive parents. Through in the room directly adjacent to the cafe, we'll be working with whānau in a mana Hansinen way, particularly where they've chosen to stay together. And then the room, which is a bit hidden, you go around the hallway up to the end, and in the end there we'll have Rion and Dan, who are amazing speakers talking about engaging with adolescents and young adults who are in that family harm and offending space. So 1:15, we won't be coming back in here to say hi and bye to your electives. We'll just assume you know where you're going. Thank you. Can I just grab Damo? Anyone? Have you got? Oi. We're just going to do a quick karakia for lunch. They're ignoring me.
Kia ora whānau. Father, we want to thank you for this amazing kōrero today. And Lord, we've picked up a lot of stuff. But now, Lord, it's time to feed the body and feed the soul. So we thank for the kai that's set before us. Bless the hands that have prepared it and bless us too. We need that. Amen.